Para. Para, para. Bara bara da dee da 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 do bara 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 da dee da da bum 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 bum. Hello everyone, how are we all doing tonight? Sort of sorted out the focus a little bit, and I'm going to start off by saying thank you, Norman Palmer. Your book's been very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. I'm sorry, Auntie. Ay, caramba. I have worked out where the ants seem to be coming from, because they seem to drop onto my head occasionally from the ceiling. So either they're crawling up there and dropping on me, or they're coming in through the roof. My theory is they're not crawling up there and dropping. They're not coming in through there. So my thinking is that they're coming in over the inner wall, which means they're coming from probably that side, because it hasn't been painted yet. Fun times. Rather than I thought they might have been coming from their side, but I haven't found their way in. Fun times. Hello everyone, how are you all doing? How's everything going? Right then. Let's see. Loud and a bit distorted. I'm hoping it's getting better. I'm not sure why it's distorted. Let me see if I can find out why. Audio input none on that one. And Right. How's that better? Is that better? Probably. Hopefully that's better. We've got that going. We've got that all automated. Should be able to work. Should be. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Nook. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Nautical Wolf. Hello, Rick Vasala. Hello, DGB40. Hello, The Plebside. Hello, Ian Carr. Hello, Pertinter. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hope it's no longer distorted. Hello, Aviator Enterprise. Hello, Sabron. Hello, Bitron. Hello, Gross Savatsky. Hello, Felix B. Circling in a Nimrod over Atlantic. Well, that's true. Animal 16365. Hello, Sabron. Polar Glory didn't account for US Marines in an hour class battleship or two. They rarely do, but let's be honest, if you're going to have US Marines and our class battleships involved, it's probably going to be quite a big fight. Hi, Agent J. Did not Soviet spies give the WP, the US Navy's cryptographic secrets? Well, they certainly gave them some, but not enough. If you notice, yes, I am drinking water. That's because I've run out of iron brew and the delivery didn't come. Yes, I am going to have an argument with Co-op at some point. No, it will not be pretty for them. Do you know what's worse? They sent Diet Coke as a substitute. I mean, on what earthly planet is Diet Coke a substitute for iron brew? Full fat Coke? Possibly. But Diet? Oh my lord. Hello, Couty Face. Hello, do you know? Praise be that. Hello. Oh, I think Couty Face is new. Hello. Welcome to the very random place. Hello, Shimmy. Hello. Yeah. Hello, Mama. Hello. How are we all doing? So, As you can see, the merchant fleet, the M, is covered up for some reason now. I do exactly. That's the styling, and it still has a bit of fun sometimes. Do you know what? They sent what? Yes, they sent Diet Coke as, you know, the replacement, the substitution for Iron Brew. It's wrong on so many levels. Adrian J, nice of you to demonstrate the importance of working logistics. Yes, logistics will be critical. Right. So, this is Patreon 22. So, as is usual, as currently is live on my Patreon. Any topics can be suggested on naval history. And I pick 6 to 8 of them. I put them to the vote, and the patrons get to vote, and the 2 most popular get made, and sometimes more of them get made because I particularly like them and I feel like it. Hence, I'm drinking water. Water is slightly more viable than Diet Coke. At least I'm sure it won't try to kill me. So, today's topic. If the Cold War went hot in 1986, would NATO's navies be capable of stopping Soviet subs ravaging the merchant fleet? Well, Kahedron, you'll take the Diet Coke off my hands. I think you'll first have to get them off my sister, because I think she went, ooh! And I think there were also caffeine-free Diet Coke as well, or something. All I know is that was my sister going, me. And me going, but I ordered for me. This is selfish, I know, but I ordered for me, not for you. Where do you stand on Coke Zero? Well, I tend to stand on top of it after I've poured it down the drain. Hello, Dan Freeman. Anyway, so this was actually a really interesting topic to get, because when first I got it, I had planned on using the software I had on my laptop and the software I had on my computer and my gaming PC, and doing some simulations and running some stuff to check it out. And to be able to give you some of the whiz-bang. Of course, that didn't work. So then I was thinking, well, do I say I'll do this on another date? Or do I turn this into the other methodology there is of actually wargaming this? And I thought, well, a thought experiment war game, I've done it a bit before, but it's kind of fun. And it's fun, and it's sort of, as we all know, doing that, I think, I would like to believe, helped a little bit in pushing Dan Freeman to starting all his projects and his things, because that sort of wargaming, a discursive war game, does really provide interesting things. And look, how toxic is the fluorescent orange dye in Iron Brew? That's just rust. That's just shavings of iron. That's nothing. Des Scott, how was the stew? It was very, very nice, thank you very much. I did post some pictures of the completed version. Coke hasn't been the same since they removed Coke from the ingredients. And when I was explaining that to one of my students recently, they went, "What?" They looked up the original recipe of Coke and they went, "What?" They allowed this to be sold? I said, "It was prescribed by doctors." Right. So, before we begin then, my policy with fizzy drinks is if I'm going to do the crime, I might as well do a worthwhile crime, because whatever happens, I'll have to do the time. Whether it has sugar in it or it has the weird sugar replacement stuff in it, you're going to end up having to do exercise. You're going to end up having to get the stuff out of you. And from my perspective, the sugar, the more naturally occurring stuff, probably is easier for your body to process than the artificially created stuff. Not that I am that particular when it comes to eating. We've all seen I do eat McDonald's. And whilst whatever they might claim, we all wonder what's in them. We all do wonder what's in them. So, when you're doing a thought experiment, a thought discussion, what's it like? Well, this is an interesting thing for me to get into. So, for starters, I had to work out what wouldn't happen. And I decided there's going to be no nuclear weapons, because the moment you have nuclear torpedoes being used by either side, then the war's going to go nuclear and be over very quickly anyway. Plus, this is going to sound strange, but considering the risk of an officer maybe going rogue or an accident, I think nuclear torpedoes, especially by 1986, are the least likely things to occur. Because no politician wants to lose control of them. Hello, Melanie1640. And hello, Adrian J. And Steph Thompson. Hello, Web Squad. You all snuck in while I've been talking about fizzy drinks. And Jeff Beeler. Hello. Anyway, so this is a thought experiment discussion. And as you notice, I've also put it's also a great way of training the people to think strategically. All these things. But rules for these are simple. There is no such thing as a bad idea, but there is such a thing as technologically or contextually impossible one. If you think such is the case, then you make your case in contrary. i.e., you disprove the idea by making an argument. You do not. The first rule that I was always taught when having these discussions is the first time you insult someone, you've automatically lost the war. So you have to be polite and civil doing it, because if you swear, or if you are rude about someone, or use the phrase, oh, you're stupid, or something like that, you've lost. And it's as much an exercise in self-control than it is anything else. But it's a great way of training people to think properly and strategically. It's a great discussion thing. You use it a lot of tools for in staff college for training officers, etc., to think strategically. Well, you do in some others don't. And the closest I can give it that many people will understand it is it's like a Dungeons and Dragons game. But instead of there being a dungeon master and everyone else being a player, everyone both acts as dungeon master and player. So you can all go, anyone can go, hang on, that idea doesn't work. It's illogical, or it's technologically or contextually impossible. Anyone can make that point. So anyone can act as the dungeon master, but also everyone can act as the player. And usually, one of the other interesting things you can do this is you can swap sides. So you can be making the case and going, well, this is what NATO would be doing in this circumstance. And someone puts in their idea and goes, well, this is how the Soviets respond. And someone else might respond with what they think NATO might do in response to that. And then you can do what the Soviet response is if you want to. You can all get involved. And that's how I'm going to try and run the discussion part of this seminar, this video later. I'm first going to go through some of the content and explain some of the things and the realities of life in 1986. So I'm going to do my part a little bit. But this is a really, really cool way of running seminars and of teaching this, but also of enjoying it yourself, because thanks to Wikipedia, thanks to Google, thanks to people having their phones, if people are interested and they fancy doing it, it turned into a dinner discussion. I have got one group of friends who we have a dinner once every year. And we've got an ongoing discussion we've been having about a battle scenario, a particular war scenario, actually in the 1930s. And it's our topic almost every year. We come in and we're sort of re-going through what the war plans would have turned out, what the battles would have actually happened. And it all started when two of us first read War Plan Orange. And so this has become it. We get together. There's 6 of us. We get together. Sometimes 7. There is one particular spouse who occasionally joins us, she joined us for 3 years, then skipped a year, then joined us last year, which happened before COVID. So we haven't had this year's one. Usually we get together in roughly February. And we have a dinner and we chat it through. And it's really cool. And it's something fun. And it's something, as a discursive technique, that can teach you a lot about your own knowledge. It's a very good way to find your own gaps. Right. Derp Squad. So, new Tuesday spot for Cooking Vine Brew with Dr. Clark? Not on the plans. Dan Freeman. The good old days of medicine, when you could do very little for a patient except give them morphine and cocaine dissolved in alcohol until whatever it was went away or killed them. Catering, wasn't that opium in some World War I ration packs? I think for one occasion. Dan Freeman. Discursive wargaming is fun, although I did recently get 10 sets of dice. D20 to D4, so I'm also happy to do other sorts of wargaming. Right. Adrian Jane, Jumas is the best fizzy drink. No, that's Iron Brew. Wrong doctor. Fizzy water is perfectly yummy. Oh no, fizzy water, no. Adrian Jane, heroin was given to children to calm down. That sounds a bit scary. Sarah, what? We can't just splatter particularly annoying Victor SN with nuclear house rock. No. The whiskey class grounded in Sweden in 1901 had 2 nuclear torpedoes aboard. Yes, that it did, but that was one of the many incidents which meant that by 1986 I was fairly certain they would have been only deployed as necessary. Good evening, Albert Zasky. In car, concern is that does one side raise the stakes to nuclear if they perceive they are losing? Well, that's an interesting discussion you can get, but also, what is their point of losing? Is it the Battle Atlantic, or is it piercing the bastions? I would argue that the Soviets would only raise it if they for piercing the bastions, and I would argue the Allied command structure was such that using it in 1980s for the Battle Atlantic probably wouldn't happen. I wasn't born in 1986. Disturbingly enough. War Plan Red is more fun or Red Storm Rising? We are using various options. Maybe use dice, both to find out how successful was the implementation idea, and another for how the other party perceived it. Nothing fancy. Roll 6, bigger the better. Could you comment on maximum range of US Mark 45? Not as far as some people would dream, but further than most people think. Vision. With the nuke torpedoes, you get the Bedford incident film on all... Yeah. Right. Well, we'll get into all this. So for starters, you've got the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. And in 1986, it's the key part for the eastern side of it is run from Naval Facility Brody. That is where the SOSUS line data is sent. So that's a critical area for us to think about. And as you can see, the Gap has islands in it, more than Greenland, Iceland, and UK. You have to expect, though, that Denmark might not be paying much attention to Iceland, so Denmark was pretty much going to get a lot of attention from Canada and America. Same with Iceland, which has an American garrison, and critically enough, some F-15s and Hawkeyes. Well, technically they're supposed to have E-3s and P-3s, but let's be honest, if you lose a carrier, that's where the Hawkeyes are going to go, and those sentries are going to be your first targets for trying to get rid of them. And you have the UK, but that is very much your secondary gap, your secondary area. Because ideally, the Americans would like to be fighting the battle not in the North Atlantic Ocean, not in the Norwegian Sea, but up in the Barents Sea. That's where they want to get to. That's also where the Soviets have their bastions. Now, their bastions are rather like a reverse of the GI-UK gap. They have various sonar, well, kind of like the SOSUS line again, which is that sort of lovely sonar line stretching in various places. They have fixed defensive positions, radars, all sorts of things to defend certain areas of the Barents Sea. Idea being, especially in the White Sea area, to have a protective area they can stick their SSBNs and be sure they're safe. Animal 16365. In 1986, would most of the Soviet naval strength be based mostly in the Baltic and Black Seas, and the Pacific Fleet being the weakest? Most of your Soviet strength is around about the Northern Fleet, actually. That's got a heavy force at this point. Pacific Fleet is technically the weakest, but the Black Sea Fleet is not as big as necessarily you might think it is today. So it's Battle of Denmark Strait, nuclear boogaloo. No, not quite well said. I don't think... Well, let's quickly... We'll get into... I do have some notes for the Mark 45. And I have to make sure I use the disclosed notes. Mark 45, of course, was out of service in, I think, 1976. So had been replaced for a while by this point. And it's the Mark 48 had come into service. Mark 48 came into service originally in 1972. And its effective firing range was 21 nautical miles at 55 knots, or 27 nautical miles at 40 knots. Well, officially estimated ranges. So there's a lot of fun to be had in the GI-UK gap, but that's not the only gap. This is the point. That's got first move by NATO, even at high tension levels, is put all vital transport items onto C-5 Galaxy aircraft instead of shipping them over on container ships. Well, the trouble is, we can go, yes, we'll do that. Oh, we'll put it all onto C-5 Galaxies. Now, the trouble is, you have 81 C-5As built at this point. And you have roughly 50 C-5Bs beginning construction in 1985. So not that many are going to be available. So, okay, right then. We're going to put everything onto a C-5 strategic airlifter. Everything to run a war on a scale. The nicest way, whilst, yes, there will be critical assets the C-5s can move, there just isn't going to be enough. Because remember, they have to not only fly there, they have to fly back. They have to be maintained. And they have to get into facilities. And where are they going to be able to get those facilities? Let's be honest. Do you want to bring a C-5 into Germany when there's a war going on? No, you don't. It might come into the UK. It might go into France. It won't go anywhere near Germany. So whatever it's bringing in is not going to be getting that close to the front lines either. So there's not much that sort of fun. Let's have a look at this thing. Okay, silent. Let's have a look at this thing. Alright, so I'm going to up the gain on the microphone a bit because I think it's missing stuff. Hopefully that's better. Right then. Norway is always fun. So this is the point. In the 1960s and furthermore into the 1970s, Soviet deployments of submarines and known deployment of submarines had certainly increased. Norway is that first gap. Norway, and I'm looking up and reminding myself of the islands to the north of Norway that I featured quite heavily at. The Svalbard Islands are the first big gap. Now, Svalbard are Norwegian. And that is the first area that the Allies wanted, well, NATO wanted to try and hold the Soviets back in. They wanted to keep them nice and beyond there. That's good. By vital, I mean the critical assets. I don't mean everything. Yeah. As the thing I was remembering, because the moment you bring up it, I wanted to explain why. The C-5s, they're lovely. They are amazing aircraft. They don't have the cracks in the wings yet at this point, Melanie, because they are pretty much still brand new aircraft. Take care, Stab Thompson. Yeah. So hunter killers in the Barents Sea. Was there a convoy escort policy for the North Atlantic, or were hunter killers considered enough protection? Oh, there are all sorts of things we're going to get into. Are we going on Aaron Cash? Are we going on the plot of Red Storm Rising by Tom Clancy on this? Nope, we're going to be starting the plot all on our own. We can use that as a starting point. You can always use that if you want, but you don't have to. And look, 2 MBTs on a C5. Yeah. As I see, also 80s is when Russian fleets are falling into despair, if I'm not wrong. No. That's the 90s. In the 80s, they're still trying to push everything ahead and keep everything going. 86, they've still got things coming in, and it's looking fairly decent. It's getting harder and harder, but it'll be late 1980s, early 1990s. So this is the last point at which the Soviets really have a full force. Emperor Fawn. Yes, Red Storm Rising does detail this potential scenario quite well. I think I've done an entire video using Red Storm Rising before, which is why I'm not using it today. Evilson, the only airfield that could handle the C5 was Frankfurt. Nothing else had a long enough runway to handle one at max weight. I think there was one in France, and I think they'd probably pull back to that. You're getting some distortion on your mic because of the pickup. Sorry about that. Lowered again, you were fine, and now it's popping. Hopefully that is better. Hopefully. But it's always sort of interesting. So, hopefully that's okay. Ay, caramba. That's good. Important to remember at this point, there's a Russian-run mine on East Svalbard. Yes, there is. But if you don't think that both sides have forces in place to deal with that mine, or try and protect that mine, or work from that mine, so basically my presumption is that there are no forces available on Svalbard to help anyone, because they're all dealing with East Svalbard mine, and the Soviets on East Svalbard are too busy dealing with the people trying to kill them to actually help out anyone else. Animal 16365. Even in 1976, was the Soviet Navy even considered a Blue Water Navy? It was considered a Blue Water Navy by that point. Sean Brent, so priority for NATO is to guarantee security of Iron Brew shipments to Connaught. Well, remember, Iron Brew is made in the UK, so we're fine. But if the Soviets interfered with the Iron Brew supply, then there would be no Soviet Union left, because there'd be a lot of very angry Scottish and a lot of very angry, almost Scottish English, who are pretty much, Frank's the Scottish family do drink Iron Brew, trying to tear them apart. So, let's start talking about some critical equipment that's going to come up. For starters, there are these lovely beauties. Now, (222M) backfire first entered service in 1972. So by 1986, it's been in service for 14 years, which could be a problem, but considering as of 2014 there are still 100 in service with the Soviet Union, shows you just how many were built. 497 of this particular variety were available. So, no, at no point do you really want to start fighting them. And in fact, in 1983, although it doesn't, technically in 1983, the 222M Backfire C standard is first enters into service. It doesn't officially enter service till 1989, but there are several of them wandering around. So you're dealing with mainly M2s, but also M3s in 1986. You don't want to take on these aircraft if you can avoid them in a straight-up fight if you're a surface force, because they can carry a lot of weapons. The 222 could carry 2 Raduga KH-22 missiles. And the M3 could carry, well, had a provision for an internal rotary launcher for Raduga KH-15s as well as KH-22s. Let's be honest, the KH-22 is not a missile you particularly want coming at your way in 1986. No, it's not particularly small. It weighs in at nearly 6 tons. And it's got a length of 11.6 meters, diameter of 92 centimeters. But it carries a 1,000-kilogram RDX warhead, or a 350 to 1,000 kiloton thermonuclear warhead. Now, again, we're keeping these to non-nuclear because we're presuming the enemy wants to do. Both sides don't want to have a global nuclear war, so they're trying to control their nuclear weapons. So they're not using them. The speed of this particular missile, Mach 4.6. The operational range, 320 nautical miles. So when you consider the 222M has, well, I think it has we can give it a comfortable range of 1,800 nautical miles from their base to get them there and back and give them a bit spare. Well, if they're armed up. That's not something you really want to take on. That means pretty much they've got a 2,000-mile radius of action. And then you have the even scarier aircraft. Now, why is the Bear the scary aircraft? Because it's coming out to find you. The Soviets don't have the support of a SOSUS line. The Soviets do not have the support of Iceland, Greenland, Svalbard, Norway, UK. They don't have any of that ability. So, they need to find you. And they want to use any means possible. Confidential 1207. Why 1986? I'm not sure. That was the year chosen in the Patreon question. So for that, you would have to ask Tim. Timothy Sims, who was the one who proposed this question. It's the 22nd Patreon question. So, that thing is flying in 2014. That thing was flying quite recently as well. The fact is, they were built to last. Now, for these, there are literally hundreds built. They're in service from 1956 onwards. They are reconnaissance aircraft. They even try one variant which is going to be nuclear powered. There are lots of them which can also carry the Raduga KH-22 missile. Those are usually known as Bear Gs. Oh my lord. So, lots of them could do lots of very nasty work with missiles. But quite a large number of them are also converted into various maritime reconnaissance aircraft. Those are usually, these days, known as the Bear F or Tupolev 142. Now, they entered service in 1972, and they produced 100 of those. And hopefully, it should be appearing, the third picture should be appearing now. I click the button. Oh, it's appeared. In the wrong place, but it's appeared. Yay. So, there isn't really much difference between the two. The upper one is a 295. That's a 2142. Bear F Bear H. Bear G was the version that was present in 1986. Basically, what I'm trying to say is we are starting off, this question does focus on submarines, but there are a lot of missiles going to be coming at anyone. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you think that the Soviets are going to focus their attacks on carrier battle groups or on convoys? Now, the interesting thing is, they could do both with these aircraft. The 295, by the way, is scary because of its range. Its maximum range is 8,100 nautical miles, which gives an effective range of patrol of up to 4,000 nautical miles. The distance from the UK to the Falkland Islands is 8,000 nautical miles. So if you had 295s in your force operating, you could patrol halfway down the Atlantic from the UK. Even if you're operating from the Soviet Union and you have to cant yourself north to avoid Norway and then go south, you still have an impressive reconnaissance range, an impressive coverage. If you add on satellite information, you then have a very, very good time. They also, as said, can carry all sorts of things. And that makes them a problem. It makes them a problem because you're going to have to factor them in. Yes, there are lots of people here commenting, but we can easily take them out. We've got missiles, we've got this, that. We're getting into some limitations of that. Hello, Bill Swidget. Says France, Alex, we don't call it the Soviet Union anymore. We don't now. We call it, it's now Russia. But in 1986, it was the Soviet Union. Got Jagger. I will be talking about surface raiders. I'll be talking about everything that can be there. That's good. Filton Airport at Bristol could have landed a max weight C5. The runway there was long enough for Concorde to land with no flaps. I think also Space Shuttle will turn the runway. Garharman, congratulations on completing safeguarding. Jomac, have the pack revised their plans so they wouldn't be using tactical nukes? Because, if they wanted to reach the Rhine in like 2 weeks and they were going to use nukes to do that. They had two plans. They did want to reach the Rhine within 2 weeks, but they also didn't want to use nukes if they could avoid it by 1986. By 1986, there seems to be quite a consensus amongst the various powers that nukes, if they start off, are going to be problematic. Also, you have to remember there's a difference between land-based nukes and sea-based nukes in terms of torpedoes on submarines and the perceptions of them by politicians. Because their perceptions is that a torpedo, it looks like any of the other torpedoes, you could make a mistake. Whereas nuclear weapons on land, they think, you keep them in specialist units, which otherwise keep well back from the fighting. The 295 is basically the Soviet/Russian version of the B-52. It's going to be around forever. Also, has anyone noticed that whilst they're talking about retiring the Warrior, the FV-1432, I forget it, the little sort of FV-432, is it? I don't know, the little sort of always seems to be there is still surviving in the British Army. Rolling cash. No mention of badgers. No mention of badgers at the moment. Because I can bring them in, but I can bring in a lot of things. In the end, if you've got badger bombers involved, well, they will get there, and I would have no doubts they would form part of any attack. But I don't think, and I have a badgery I can add in here. Yeah. There's a badger, for anyone wondering what the Soviet about. By the way, these names, Backfire, Badger, Bear, they're provided by NATO. They're not the names. No one actually would name their bomber the Badger bomber. Although that would be cool. The Blackburn Badger bomber. We'll leave that to one side. Leave that, they would be involved. The Soviets would be chucking the kitchen sink at these things. But again, these have slightly less range, and in my mind, they would probably be getting used for the big critical attacks, whereas these could be used. The 222Ms, Backfires, and the Bears would be out every single day hunting for targets. The Badgers would be the more special occasion, we really want to throw the kitchen sink at you approach. Shremak, in 1984, the US started making ASAT missiles. Did the USSR have an equivalent? Yes, they did have an anti-satellite system. In fact, I think they had an anti-satellite system before the US. Although theirs was more a case of, this is a converted ICBM which carries a killer satellite. Trent McKay, are the OS SAGs going to play any role in this scenario? Well, they might. They might. As you can see, I'm operating a picture below and slides above scenario. So, critical Soviet combatants. Well, again, I'm going to disappoint you because in 1986 there's only 2 Oscars in service. So it's Charlie's all away. And it's going to be the Victor class. If you've got any SSNs involved, it's going to be the Victors. So, let's make sure we know the Victor stats. Now, broadly speaking, they had 4 bow tubes and can carry 18 torpedoes, missiles, anything that can be fitted them. So they could carry Starfish cruise missiles, Skivel rocket repeater torpedoes, I think, and various other lots and lots of fun things. So they have a limit though of 18. And that's the real point when you start talking about using SSNs for this role. They have a limit of 18. That's what they can carry. Now, before anyone starts coming up to going, but this means that you can't use them for merchant ship. Well, the Type 7 submarine carried 14 torpedoes. The difference was it also had 220 rounds of deck gun ammunition. That's its advantage. That's what it's basing things off. Dan Freeman, that's rude. If we go back to the does that it have implants? No, that's its scanning system. Okay. Surface search radar. Let's see. This one, some missiles are not nearly as effective as people think they are. No, they aren't. But if you're launching several thousand of them, it tends to nullify their effectiveness, their problems. Not to be going back so far, but I have got what was being spoken about with the Russians and had a mine on Svalbard. What is this? Yes, the Russians operated a mine on the Norwegian territory of Svalbard, which they'd set up, I think, during World War II, and they had traditional access to it. Carmen, would the 2142 Maritime Patrol aircraft work in cooperation with U-295s? Often they would be mixing in and out. Carmen, Karoo and Haverford's West airfields at the time could both be relatively easily being lengthened out as on along flat land. There were a few options in the UK. I'm fairly sure Cold Roads, which is also apparently a landing point for 747s which are in trouble, and I think possibly space shuttles as well. It could probably take them. Go on. Did the Soviet Union buy into the Star Wars hype and think it would neutralize their ICBMs? Not really as much as the Americans would have liked them to. Victor's machine gun always has a place in everything. Hello, Turning 3434. I would say badges would do the daily dirty work on poor Norway. I think that is, again, far more likely that that's what the badges would be doing, with the support of fighters. Let's be honest, you can afford to use them as a bomb truck when they've got fighter security. The backfires, they're more for when you don't have necessary fighter support. Animal 6365. I think they'd both be used against it. I think you probably have an experience where you might well have backfires attacking from one side and bears attacking from another. Jimek, I read somewhere that the 80s perception of bomber crews was they might sink carriers but get massive losses doing it. And is this not acceptable to the Soviet Union? That's the question. It might not be acceptable to you, but it might be acceptable to them. Take out the carrier battle groups, and what do? You've protected. Suddenly, the main thing you've got that can attack the bastions, where the Soviet Union has their vital nuclear weapons, undersea bastions, their SSBNs, are gone. So, the Soviet Union has 48 Victors of the 1, 2, and 3 type. So, you can probably guarantee having, in 1986, probably about 30 or so available for operations, especially under war scenarios. The Charlies, well, there's about half a dozen of those which would be viable. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Critical Soviet service commands. Well, if there's going to be a surface action group come out, you can expect these two pretties to come with it. Yes, that is the Kirov and that is the Norisokya. Yes, one of the Kiev class. Whoo! So that would be the core of any surface group should the Soviets decide to come out. That is a lot of firepower coming your way. Remember, though, they have a lot of other ships which could be in that surface task force. And don't expect it to be small. The Soviet Union has a habit of thinking in terms of massed volley fire, i.e. a lot of missiles. And if they really want to ruin your day, they'll want to send missiles from everything at once. The decisive battle doctrine had in many ways morphed into the decisive engagement or decisive strike doctrine, which was the idea that you would bring everything. All your missile aircraft, all your submarines with missiles on, all your ships with missiles on, any land-based missiles you have, all would be arraigned and all would fire at roughly the same time. So your enemy force would be drowning in missiles. This was their answer to Aegis. This was their answer to the layered battle group air defense strategy. This was like their answer to everything, was basically to overwhelm it. Anyone would think they were students of the Second World War. Now, so this is your surface force. This is what your surface force is built around. However, sorry, Akula class, there is literally Akula in service. So she's probably protecting the SSBN bastions. And the Alphas, again. There are 7 of those in service, and if I have to pick, let's see, what's more important? Attacking to the survival of my nation. Attacking your convoys with a submarine which is really not designed for it, because let's be honest, the Alpha class submarine carries 18 torpedoes again, but it only has a crew of 31. Sorry. Don't know why I yawned then. Possibly because I'm running out of liquid. It's not really what you want to have your oceanic assassins going and doing. Engaging Los Angeles class submarines trying to break into the Barents Sea and trying to take out your SSBNs? Yes. Going and hunting down convoys? Well, let's be honest. That is perfectly good enough for doing it. Yes, it's going to be noisy, but I did think about them using their SSKs for it. And they might. But I thought also that those SSKs might well be used as their defensive vessels. Peter Dawson, the US lost a few torpedo bombers on Battle of Midway, so what? That's a sad thing for fighters. This Russell, the Kirovs are like King Tigers though. Very powerful, but the loss of a single ship would be a massive loss. I agree, but let's consider it. As built, they carried 20 P700 Granite missiles. Now, those things weigh in at 7 tons. They carry a 750 kilogram warhead. Had a speed of Mach 1.6 at low altitude or Mach 2.5 at high altitude. And they're just not a nice thing to come across. You don't want to come across them. let's be honest, they're not, you know, they're not going to give you a happy day. And, well, the Noresk, which is pictured, she of course carries 8 Basalt P500 Basalt missiles. Which also had a maximum speed of Mach 2.5, had an operational range of about 300 nautical miles, 550 kilometers, and a 1-ton warhead out of a missile which weighs in at 5 tons. This is not something you want to be hit by. Okay? Yes, you might well dodge it. But if there are enough missiles coming in at the same time, that's going to be your problem. And that is the Soviet plan. The Soviet plan is nothing pretty. The Soviet plan is not something clever or fancy for dealing with carrier battle groups. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need finesse. It's a sledgehammer. You know, it's basically crack. That's what they want to do on a walnut. In comparison, this is the NATO weapons. But the idea was the NATO weapons you wouldn't see coming. The NATO weapons would dodge and dive, and the Soviets would never see them coming. So by the time it got to crack, there was already whack. Ow. So I dropped it on my foot. That's the idea. And that's what's going on. And Fab, surely the mass missile strike is the same in essence as all the Pacific carrier battles. Pretty much. As I said, it's a variation on the decisive battle doctrine. Okay. Butrin. At US Naval Postgraduate School, NATO lost every single scenario we wargamed. Pretty good for you guys then. Dirt Squad. Reacula and Alpha classes were intended to run at high speed to a carrier battle group, sink the carriers, and hope to escape. But sinking the carriers was by far the priority. Yes, but those things, maybe, maybe not. But also defending the ballistic missile subs is the even higher priority. And it's the one you're never going to talk about publicly. And as I said, at this point, there is 1 Akula in service and 7 Alphas. Soon, if this strategy didn't work and opponents were still standing after a mass strike, you have to wonder how much of the fight the Soviets can sustain. Well, if the opponents are still standing after the first mass strike, they'd come back with another one. That was their idea. Abzaski, the Kiev class was somewhat hindered by their designated play. The Yak-38 was flawed and barely operational. Yes, please notice that at no point did I mention the aircraft on the Kiev because I really don't want to consider it counted. It's it makes the Harrier look positive. The Harrier of 1986 look positively Tomcatish. Although the Harrier of 1986 is a fairly decent aircraft. Shumak, generally I'd like to have no missile shot of me. We all would. JBL, what is the role of Northern Fleet Amphibious Forces? Just Norway or something more ambitious? It would depend on how they're employed, what you'd like to do. Do you think you could deploy them? You know, the whole thing in Red Storm Rising that they do is they deploy airborne troops by container ship. It works. but it's difficult. If you're going to use the amphibious troops, they probably are going to go to Norway. That's probably it, because you need to take Norway out. As we were going and mentioning earlier, Norway is kind of in a bad place for the Soviets. They have to literally go through Norway. Now, let's consider critical allied combatants. Now, I've already mentioned the SOSUS line, but there's also the Modified Tactical Auxiliary General Ocean Surveillance Ship, i.e. USNS Stalwart. Now, why have I brought up USNS Stalwart? Well, they're the ocean surveillance ships. They are the Surface Towed Array Sensor System, or the SIRTAS system. And they are a critical long-range listening tool. It had been developed starting in 1973. In 1980, it passed OPIVAL. And so by 1986... you have Stalwart, Contender, Vindicator, Triumph, Assurance, Persistent, Indomitable, all in service. You also have Prevail about to come into service in 1986, and Assertive as well. So, you have a lot of these ships, and they are useful. They are very, very useful. They provide a lot of data to back up the SOSUS lines and make sure that any submarines coming into the North Atlantic will be heard. And that's going to be the critical thing. If you can hear a submarine coming in, then you can send P8s, well, P3s at this time, of course, and Nimrods to go and hassle it. And any submarine which is being hassled is going to be less effective. Now, we have been talking about the lack of escort carriers. Well, that is why I have Atlantic Conveyor here. This is what the British do in 1982. In 1986, I'm fairly certain you get the same thing happen again. You have various ships of suitable size transformed into helicopter carriers. Who knows? They might even get a version of Phalanx on a container put on them. There's good. Defending the missile boats was the role given to the old SSN classes. In Ralph, the Akio and Alpha were kept for shrinking. Look, this is going to sound strange, but here is the thing. I have done a lot of looking at this in my time, and I know what's talked about in terms of the Soviets' claim strategy. But there is one problem with this. The Soviets, in their end, are usually fairly conservative when it comes to naval strategy. And when you've got the Los Angeles class and other vessels entering service and being as dangerous as they are, I don't think their assassin subs end up being used for defending for attacking carriers. They might, but you see, there is a difference here. I wouldn't be surprised if those assassin subs do end up in the Barents Sea and maybe even the Norwegian Sea. But if you're talking about something going on in the North Atlantic Ocean where the convoys are going to be, I don't think they're going to be sent that far away from home. So, yes, you honestly probably are right. They'll be going after the carriers, but I doubt they'll be going into North Atlantic to go after the carriers. That'll be the Victor's job. Why? Because they have a lot more of the Victors to go round, and because, honestly, if they lose them, then they're going to be less upset. So it's not me going, oh, no, they disregard their doctrine and all these things. It's going, well, if you're talking about the convoy battle, why am I going to be sending an Alpha or an Aquila after a convoy? I'll be using them if I'm going to send them after a carrier battle group. But where my carrier battle groups will be, they won't be with the convoys. The carrier battle groups, the NATO doctrine doesn't have them anywhere near. The closest carriers you're going to get with a convoy is probably good old HMS Invincible. And again, with the surface task group, they're only coming out after they fought the carrier battle groups. And look, new in our Army ROTC instructor, stationed in Germany late 1970s. Even with 100% one-shot kill on Soviet tanks, NATO ran out of precision munitions before the Soviets ran out of tanks. Yep. Trent McCartney, I'm beginning to see why the F-14 was designed to shotgun out Phoenix missiles, AN-154s, like it was going out of style. Pretty much. Ian Carr, would USSR respect Swedish neutrality? Doubtful, but Sweden tends to be quite heavily armed, so their choice might be respect Swedish neutrality or find themselves fighting someone who's very scary, who they didn't need to fight. Dirt Squad, Alpha and Aquila. I agree that Alpha and Aquila are not going into North Atlantic to go after convoys. Yeah, it's just a case of when I see that in books, I'm going, why? Why am I sending an Alpha after especially in 1986 when I have 7 of them and I have 1 Aquila? Why would I be sending it? So, what do I think the convoys would have an escort of? Well, they might have Invincible. They might have these. Any of them that survive getting the Royal Marines into Norway, they could have. With the escort group, the carriers, with the convoys. I think you also find probably this level of cruiser. I think the Belknap class might well have been used as convoy escorts. Now, why do I say that? Because by this point they were sort of considered the second tier. The Virginias and Ticos are entering service. The Virginias and Ticos are taking the lead in terms of the carrier battle groups. So you have the Belknaps available for the convoys. So I think the Belknaps will be on the convoys. And Adrian J, the Alpha had terrible endurance for nuke sub. Not being sent far away. Dan, how much escalation stations to do quick conversions like container ships or reactivation of mothball fleet ships for the Langford? Well, I'm basically allowing it to be as long as the Falklands War. So I'm saying it's about 3-4 weeks going on. And honestly, that makes sense because if you consider for the British, we have the templates for the Atlantic conveyor already there. Everything's already worked out. And please note, the templates for the Atlantic conveyor. This conversion does not appear from nowhere. I know there is much history put into saying, oh, the British just suddenly innovate this really cool idea. So the British, who have been preparing since World War II to refight the Battle Atlantic, who during that war had to convert merchant ships to escort carriers quite heavily, you honestly believe no one in the British Ministry of Defence, no one in the Department of the Naval Constructors. No one of them has been keeping an up-to-date schematic for what you might need to do to create a modern escort carrier. Because, as we know, the British government doesn't ever keep doing something, even past the point at which it makes sense. So when there's even the smallest case to do something, they would certainly give up on the idea. Nah. So, the Atlantic conveyor conversion, very, very quick. This round's a big issue of solid subs, though, is they're really tricky to find. Last time there was a mass Russian deployment of them around the UK. It really required high-powered sonar buoys to track them. I would agree, but the thing is, they're coming for you. That's the sneaky advantage of a convoy. You see, the sneaky advantage of a convoy system is not that it reduces the numbers of targets, but it concentrates them, which allows the defenders to work on the process of, instead of us having to watch the whole ocean, we only have to control the ocean around our ships. It reduces your problem. And we're 16365. If there was a war in the Atlantic in 1986, do you think the naval battles would be short, quick, and very bloody? I think there would be ambushes, most of them. Tim Gedge begs a different details anyway. The role of the containers and the foremast changed during the conversion. I would agree various things change, and I have read Tim Gedge's work, and I do know I have chatted with him in the past about it. And the thing I would point out is, yes, things have to change because of the specific ship they're using. But they do have a rough plan already. Now, I'm sorry, a generic plan is going to need to be changed for individual ships. It is going to be. But that doesn't mean the tailoring of the plan does not tell me they didn't have a plan. And the fact that various other things get sorted out quite so quickly, and various things get worked out quite so easily, suggests that they did have a plan. Possibly designed around a larger ship is always been my idea. I've always wondered if the Atlantic conveyor was the largest ship they could get for the role, but their plans have been around employing a bigger vessel. Frank Watson, in World War II, there were many torpedoes used as scuttle-friendly ships. Would you be able to guess how many were wasted like this? Would we use them in that role still? We would still probably use them in that role if we needed to. And no, it's in the hundreds. John Luke, hi Dr. Clark. Would CVGs, carry battlegroups, not be kept out of the way until absolutely necessary? Or once you're sure they can strike freely, you can walk stuff into... No, the carrier battle groups are going to have to go in. That's the only way you're going to push back the strikes. The only way you are going to push this threat back into the the Norwegian Sea and into the Barents Sea is by your carrier groups going forward. It would be nice to be able to operate from the GIUK gap area, but you're only going to be able to do it by pushing forward. And if you don't push forward, you're going to get accused of banning Norway. So politically, you have to push forward. That's the problem for the NATO allies. Critical Allied combatants, though, well, there are two types of frigates you have in large numbers. You have the older frigates, which, honestly, no one is sure why, but you still have a huge number and no one's replaced them because people are trying not to spend money. Yes, that is a Leander class. I do like them, but they're very good ships for about the 1950s. Possibly early 1960s. By 1986, oh no. And you also don't have the Oliver Hazard Perry Swarm. Lots and lots of them around, which is useful. I still haven't named my hammer. As I said, though, you have the two choices. You have the precision, take out things. Ow! That's gone. Now I've dropped this. I can't hit this anymore because I've lost the ability to use this. Or you have the whoomp, everything taken out technique. That's, broadly speaking, what we're talking about. The two hammers of war approach, we will call this. Appropriately enough, this is 4.5 kilograms, so I will now call it the 4.5. Right. God Jagger, HMS Hermes didn't refit for service in India, so RMA Commodore. They may do. Hermes might come back, but I haven't put that in because, honestly, if she does come back, she'll be doing the same role as the Invincibles with convoy escorts. So, for escort carriers, was the Harrier equivalent to for a swordfish? It would be, yeah, Sea Harrier 2s. I think a few of them were available at this point by 1906. And it would be Sea Kings. And a whole lot of American helicopters. I forget what they call theirs. Off the top of my head. Seahawks. Yeah, so are there any NATO operations between the carriers and the subs in the Barents Sea and the North Atlantic convoy routes? Well, that's the whole point. We're going to be sort of getting into this, but the whole point is the idea that the GIUK gap is sort of a SOSUS area. Then there are the NATO North Atlantic Ocean, where there are the convoys, which will have their escorts. Carrier battle groups will push into the Norwegian Sea, and the submarines would push into the Barents Sea. That's the idea. Which is why the next group I'm talking about is a bit weird. Not as critical as you'd think from Allied operations. Sorry, for anyone who's thinking 1986, TICOs are around. Let's start. There are 4. 4! 4 more were in the water, but I doubt you'd get more than 6 in service in June 1986. USS Virginia. There are 4 of these nuclear-powered cruisers. Here is the point I have to make. Imagine if you'd taken the nuclear-powered hull of the Virginia and you'd extended it a bit and given it the Aegis control system of the TICO. Yes, it would have been expensive, but oh god, it would have been beautiful and powerful. Oh, that would have been a cruiser for the ages. Oh my lord. Dan Freeman, will the RM pull out some very full swordfish or something to add to the air groups? There is a disturbingly large number of swordfish available at this point. This runs another major concern is NATO tended not to have nearly the same material stockpiles as Soviets. Yes, that was a problem. Seeking. I did say seeking. Jeff Miller, the Sea King was the Swordfish and the Sea Harrier the Sea Fury. Probably. Or maybe the Sea Hurricane. And those up to 6 TK do not have VLS. No, they don't. Jeff Beeler, do not forget the 2 California CGNs. Yeah, that's another 2 ships. Is the Kid class around? Yes, I think they're around at this point. You know, there are a few good ships around, but there's Simpson. Timu Luca. So the UK needs more aircraft of an aircraft carrier support ship like HMS Unicorn to support their newest aircraft carriers, right? Oh yes, we need another Unicorn, but we always need another Unicorn. Virginia is cooler than Tico. You can say that again. Look at them. The Virginias look cool. Admittedly, if you'd taken a Tico superstructure and stuck that on a Virginia, it might have looked less cool. But considering their nuclear power, they'd have been a lot faster and had a lot more speed. A lot more power and range. It'd just been good. So why did the tribals need to be rebuilt after the war began? They weren't rebuilt. They were refitted quite a lot during war, but that was mainly because of damage. kind of off today's topic as well. God, Jagger, there was a plan for 7 Aegis Virginia. I know, it was canned. It's terrible. Just terrible. Peter Dawson, 4 synchronous there might be, but half will be in the Pacific. Half weren't in the Pacific at this point. All 4 of the ones in operation were in the North Atlantic. As I understand it, because of various working up trials. None were in 1986. None were in the Pacific. They were all in the Atlantic. Where are Clemenceau and Foch? They are wandering around, loaded with French aircraft. Crusaders. They would have been basically Clemenceau and Foch would probably have gone north with the big American carriers to go into the Norwegian Sea. They've got a question which might be outside the scope of the sonar, but which non-NATO countries would join against Russia, and would China or others join the USSR? Depends. If they thought they were winning, others might join Russia or the Soviet Union in the war, or definitely the Warsaw Pact. Non-NATO countries join the UK. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, a few other powers like that. India would probably be independent, but independent in such a way as to make sure it was seen as pro whoever won. And again, depending on how the Soviets handled their southern front, the Middle Eastern powers might be pro or independent. Frank Spider, do you think the New Orleans CAs and independent CVLs were good classes? Is that a technique we could still use to convert ships to CVs? They were good ships for their time. Nowadays, I doubt it, because it's the hull types. So, here are 2 critical classes which you'll probably not think about, but Los Angeles class. By 1986, Flight 2 with VLS had ended service. In fact, USS Providence, the second of those, is still in service to this day, or the first. Always. The fact is, the Los Angeles are the critical submarines in terms of getting into the Barents Sea. Yes, there are a few Royal Navy subs who will certainly be joining them, but in number terms, it's going to be the Los Angeles. I'm sorry, they're going to be providing the bulk of the force. But on the defensive, manning the GIUK gap in terms of being vessels to ambush any SSNs trying to get through it, well, that's probably going to be the SSKs. And that's going to be like Ocelot here. Sometimes. Roger, would not the Vulcan ADV have been used? A dozen Phoenix AWACS electronics and over 400 miles of range of Corsi, a Bombay fuel tank, if they built them. If they'd built them, they might have used them. But if they'd had them, this is the question. I'm going with what they actually had in 1986 and actually had available. Scott, I'm fairly sure that in the escalation tension phase that the hulls in water will be rushed to completion. Yes. That will be happening. In car, being on board HMS Ocelot. US could really use some SSKs. Honestly, the US doesn't need SSKs as much as Britain and various other powers do. But the trouble is, again, it's kind of like a debate I was getting into the other day when someone's going, oh, why didn't the Royal Air Force buy F-35As instead of 35Bs? Because they'd have fitted with them far more. And I went, well, because then you'd have had lost the Typhoon fleet and a lost Tempest. Because why would the Treasury justify 2 aircraft which look exactly the same to me? They look exactly the same to them, operate from land. One can do all the strike role as well as the air defense role. And one can do primarily the air defense role with refitting it so it can do the strike role. Okay. But as it is, we've got a carrier group, an expeditionary fighter force, which is the 35B, and we've got our air defense and deployed fighter, which is our Eurofighter. And perhaps Soviets had a balanced sea rig for sound. Generally, they had more idea about what was in there than Allied subs thought, but it was more useful to keep that to themselves. It's true. But it's like the sauce line. We were very, very, and still are very cagey today about how good it is. Frank Sparson, how might the Russians use the Kirov command ship one they built? The one with the giant dome on it. Timon can look at what? So UK SSKs don't have typical teardrop design. Must be a noisy boat. In that period, they were pretty darn good. That's a fairly good SSK for their design. They remember these are the flower of 1960s design. They're still in service at this point. The U class haven't come into service. I'm fairly sure the Soviet communication ship or command ship, the Ural, would have been, well, let's provide a picture of her. As we've been asked a question. Now, my sincere theory on her is that she would be operating, well, I think as far away from the combat area as possible. She only carries light defensive weapons and is assigned to the Pacific Fleet when she enters service, but she doesn't enter service till, well, she isn't technically commissioned until 1989. She is launched in 1983, so in 1986 she might be available, but I doubt it. They only have 2 of the Kirovs available. Adrian J, do you sense the 3SK in 96? Yes, it did. In 1986. Let's go. The Sosa's line, Schrodinger's line. It can sound to hear a ship in New York Harbor and not hear a container ship with the crew hitting the hull with hammers above it. Yeah, that is the joy of various books. Ron Cash, would there have been any mass recommissioning of hulls by either NATO or Soviets? I'm fairly certain the reserve fleets would have got plundered for whatever was available. Basically, the longer the war goes on, the more likely they are to start activating stuff. The Soviets have a lot more down there, though, to call from. So, interesting enough, today there was a good tweet. And I spotted it and went, ooh, I like that. And this is from Terravamine. I think AC Naval History said it best. I didn't pick it entirely because it said that, but no. It's actually because it summed up what I had said before, but also what I thought very well. Nobody has the means to pursue an anti-trade war with subs today, because subs do not carry many torpedoes and stocks aren't that large. Cold War and modern sub-warfare strategy is focused on attacking combat vessels only. I think there is, to a large extent, a likelihood of that. I see in a modern convoy war, in my idea of a convoy war, that the Allies especially would experience Soviet subs trying to take out the escorts to leave the convoys free to be harassed and taken out en masse by the bombers. Because let's be honest, if the Soviet submarine takes out the escort, then those container ships have no chance. They're plodding along. Once you've found them, you're able to follow them on satellites. Once you've found them, you're able to keep a bear not far from them. As happens in Red Storm Rising, as happens in many, many things. So I think the likelihood is you have a convoy battle, which is rather strange in that it focuses more on the escorts, necessarily, than the container ships. Which is another reason why I think this is an interesting scenario. Mainly because whenever I've been involved in these discussions, the amazing thing has been how effective this sort of vessel can be in a convoy war, in a limited scenario. Loaded to bear mainly with helicopters. The trouble is, you run out of aircraft before you run out of ships. That's the big problem. You run out of Sea Harriers. You run out of Harriers available full stop. I have a feeling the Harriers which were planned to be sold to the Indian Navy along with Hermes would more likely have been gone. Nope, we're keeping those. Emergency orders issued, we'll keep them. Why? Because they're fine for what they needed to do, which is keep bomber shadowers away. The whole point is to shoot down the shadowing aircraft. That's what a Harrier's for. Nothing fancy. Doesn't need to be fancy. It needs to be fast enough to hunt down that thing. So I'm going to go fast. Even a Harrier can catch it, given a tailwind. So, here's broad strokes, because we'll be discussing this now, after I go get some more water, because I'm got through the water. If the carrier battle groups hold a naval battle at the Soviet bastions, forcing them to focus submarines' attention on defending them, then the convoys are going to be fine, pretty much, because it will be a simple one-dimensional battle of bombers versus convoys, and whilst the bombers have a lot of missiles, if they've got to get past the F-14s of the carrier battle groups, the F-15s in Iceland, the Tornadoes in the UK, whatever they put in Greenland, probably some more F-15s, then there's going to be a lot of attrition rate. So yes, they will score some victories, but they won't stop a lot of it. And the convoys will probably just go further south. And that's the thing you have to realise, is that convoys will push south. You know, if I am commanding a convoy and I'm routing it, and I'm looking at this battlesphere, I'm going to go, how far south can I go? And I think I would keep to the below. I would probably keep below Cornwall the whole way. I would probably try and keep as close to the Azores and the Central Atlantic as possible. Yes, it will add some days onto my passage, but it'll make air attack and sub-attack that much difficult. Now, someone is quite quickly, and let me just point out who it was. It is Fran's fault, I think, was it? No. How important are the Soviet base in Cuba for subs operating as convoys? They would be very important if they can make it to them. But in the nicest way, what are the odds that the first thing the Americans do with all their aircraft from home, the moment they see those those bases, and the moment the sign war is go, bye bye. Cuba is kind of like Berlin. It's going to get flattened or it's going to get ignored completely. Darius Rozatsky. The Soviets had tons of Foxtrot and Juliets in stock. They could use them as a filler roll subs to beef up numbers and saturate target. They could, but I have a feeling with the Foxtrots, well, they only finished building them in 1983, so they probably do get used quite a lot. But they'll be the noisier ones, and they'll be filling in lots and lots of roles. And let's be honest, they're SSKs. There is a limit to their capabilities. There is a limit to their range. They are probably going to be used a lot for those bastions and defensemen, because again, the advantage of an SSK is it really is silent when it stops. An SSN, it powers down its reactor as much as it can, but it's still got to keep something flowing through, because otherwise it'll go critical and turn it into a bomb. So an SSK, it can really go silent. I think you also have some tangos in service in 1986. You have no kilos, I think. But good thing about the Russians is they do keep producing their SSKs. I have to look. The proposed Amur class do look rather cool. Yep. Vision. A bit of wind in a canal can sink a modern trade. It can certainly cause it trouble. Dan Freeman, is this more a fairly short war rather than a long war scenario? No, the moment you're getting into convoy battles, it's starting to get into a long war scenario, because it's going to be longer than 2 weeks. Because you think, forming up, organising the convoys. Yes, you'll try and get that run in days. Getting them running across the Atlantic, it's going to be longer. Hieroglyph. Convoys in World War II would have been less important than World War II because of large jet transports and pre-positioning of lots of equipment and supplies. Yeah, that's always the dream, but it's not the reality. As we talked earlier, the C5, there is only so much you can move. And your jet transports are lovely until someone starts shooting you out the sky, and you don't have that many of them. And in many ways, they are far easier to take. You either have to land them sufficiently far away from the enemy that you're then going to be moving your force up from a long way away, or you have to get them close enough that they're going to get... Where'd you go? Disagree with that statement almost completely. Suspect you're overthinking. There are so few modern merchants, the ships are absolutely worth a torpedo. I agree the ships are worth a torpedo. My thinking is whether there'll be enough submarines around to sink both them and the convoy escorts, considering they're carrying about 18 torpedoes. Let's say you require at least 4 torpedoes per escort. That means you can knock out 4 escorts if your submarine doesn't get sunk doing it. And I'm not saying that because I think it requires 4 hits to destroy an escort. I'm thinking you might fire... Would you fire... If you're in a real-world scenario and you've got an enemy escort bearing down on you, and you know if you fire one and miss, it's going to know where you are and kill you, why would you fire one? You'd be firing 2, 3, 4. Central Germany would have gone okay for the SSR, but they likely would have been stopped at the Rhine. Yeah, they might not have got as moved. People often forget just how many rivers go up and go across Germany and how many freaking crossings you have to make. Honestly, I think that's going to be the big thing that'll slow down the US Soviet Union when they first attack. And then you say that we don't have torpedo stocks these days. Not sure how true that was in '86, but today, what used to take multiple nights to sink, 100,000 K in 4 nights and 12 ships and 12 boats, can we sunk with a single torpedo today? That's true, but we still don't have that many torpedo stocks. Jemek, in the case of air cover Atlantic, KT-10 have been even more important than Liberators in World War II. They would allow to use fighters transiting to Europe from Connaught as additional cap against 295s. That would more than likely be going on. No really good drones available in the 1980s yet at this point. The Tangos were newer. They came after the Foxtrots, but there's a Foxtrot sitting in a British river. Are you aware of any naval reactors that can cool at monument power just via connection current and the connection currents within itself? Not in 1986, and even the modern ones. There are ones which are theoretically capable of that, but I wouldn't like to do it. It's one of those scenarios. Well, we could do this, but it's going to be a high risk one. Deb Scott, SSNs are inherently noisy. The requirements of moving coolant and other systems that can't be shut down make a lot of noise. Some still gets out, it does. It's mostly cut down, but some still does get out. In turning 3434, the USNs need and can deploy all over the world, really at all times. So SSK don't need to. No, that's the other advantage of SSKs. They're usually used for protective operations. Modern torpedoes are like Mark 14s, too expensive to take extensive tests. Do they effectively work? Maybe. It's why World War II were used in the Falklands. That's also because, frankly, the people using them in the Falklands were thinking, we're engaging a giant, great big World War II era cruiser. Will our modern torpedoes designed for modern ships work? We don't know. So, let's use something else. In fact, a lot cheaper and easier to sink a load of tanks on a ship than to blink them on land. Yeah, it's even easier to knock out an aircraft which is carrying 2 tanks at a time, and is slow numbering because of it. But the thing is, USSR knew they only had to sink the first Reforger convoy to ensure land victory. They thought it was only the first one, but I would say you needed to sink the second one as well. What would the Canadians be able to throw in the fight? Anything good? The tribal class destroyers, the new ones they had. They didn't really have a lot of great ships in 1986. So we extensively test modern torpedoes fine. Just things like Tigerfish were completely blooming useless. Yeah, we do now, but I think in 1980s it was a bit weirder. So much Soviet kit was amphibious because of rivers, e.g. BMP. Yeah, but the trouble is the BMP is not something I would want to take against one of the tanks in the period. Dev Squad, I think it's important to remember that 1980s torpedoes can leave the tube quite quietly and go out away from the sub before going hot. Yes, but the torpedo comes out, it misses, you fire a snapshot down the line of bearing. Or you go active with your sonar. The moment a torpedo's in the water, aiming in your general direction, you're going to go active on your sonar and you're going to ping off a torpedo. It's just what you're going to do. Trent McCartney, whose forces would be easier to rearm, not accounting for battle damage, and get back to the operation status after the first wave of battles? Probably the Soviets. The reason I say that is because they had far more vertical integration in their force structure than the Allies did. But there again, the differences and the variety of Allied weapon systems would have probably made them more difficult for the Soviets to predict what they were fighting. That's got jumping on. That actually has a torpedo defense system built into the hull. We're going to need a bigger boat. No, torpedo. Bigger torpedo. Yes, I think that was probably what they were thinking. We don't like to talk about the tigerfish, but there is a reason the spearfish was developed so quickly. To France's fault, the UK could be huge weak link whilst being key location to hold, and so to blockade is as real now as it was in World War 1 to 2. Yeah. And in 1986, the RCN has a sworn destroyer escorts with either a Sea King or ASROC, plus Argus and Tracker and ASW aircraft. They have all sorts of interesting things. Nothing super fancy I'm going to focus on. But you can talk them out and they are going to be useful. Frank Spencer, do you see surface ships actually fighting each other in this time? Not probably in the convoy battles, unless the carrier battle groups get beaten up and the Soviets send out that surface force out. Then there's a scenario for it. But other than that, no. Discord, it seems you hear the launch. Knowing that there'll be an area snapshot torpedo when heard, that is to send it left or right for a couple of kilometers before activating systems. The moment I hear a torpedo pinging in the water, I'm going to turn on my active sonar. So, yes, you are right. Maybe I miss with my torpedo. But maybe I don't, because if I've got active sonar pinged on, then I've got an accurate solution and I'm launching on you. I've also killed some whales, but, you know. Life happens. In-car, how reliable and effective would the other Warsaw Pact nations forming the USSR have proved to be? Probably they'd have found a lot of their troops on the front line in the first wave. I.e., make sure to use up the forces before they can start causing trouble. The Russian tanks were made to drive on the bottom of the river via snorkeling. One of those tanks have lots of training for those occasions. Yes, and they do have it. And I have to admit, though, there is one small problem. What do the Germans do to a lot of their riverbanks, and what's the case for a lot of modern riverbanks? In some of the areas which are best to cross them and you're most interested in crossing them, they've been built up and have got concrete walls and all sorts of other things which are used as flood defences and river management tools. Which means you can't get out of the water unless you first manage to structurally damage the concrete in a way which allows you. So that limits down the areas you can pass through. If nuclear depth charges and torpedoes are being used, Wales already have the worst time. Yes, but if you're using nuclear torpedoes and nuclear depth charges, then you're getting into a lot of trouble. That's good. This is where the thermal layers come into play. It's possible to hide from active sonar in the open ocean. Okay, so. That was certainly the case in World War II strength sonar. To an extent, it didn't always work. The thermal layer is not always as deep as you would like it to be, or as shallow as you would like it to be. Thermal layer is where the thermal layer wants to be. Secondly, if you have a powerful enough sonar, and yes, you have a thermal layer, it will still get an accurate enough picture of your location with its powerful enough active sonar that the torpedo will find you beneath the thermal layer. And if you're beneath the thermal layer and you're launching from there, it's also going to affect your targeting solution. So this is the point. If you're below the thermal layer, that's great. You are harder for the enemy to detect, but it's also harder for you to detect them. So you have to be above to fire. So therefore, you're wanting to do a snapshot maneuver where they fire off their torpedoes, launch them, and then quietly, without revealing their position, so of course they can't spool up their engines or go to full power or anything like that. They have to do it quietly, drifting, manage to get below the thermal layer before that torpedo gets to 2 kilometers, goes live, and the ship goes active on the sonar. It's a nice scenario. If you can pull it off, you are a very, very good captain. You're an excellent submarine commander. The reality is, it's unlikely. Making a bunch of rubble does not necessarily make it the best way to get in and out for your vehicles from river. That's what I'm going from a retired USN sonar tech knows about sonar. You can use a torpedo sonar if it's wire guided rather than the subs. You're using USN sonar technology and presuming the Soviets are the same. I'm not presuming it's any worse. I'm also not presuming it's the same. But also, in 1986, there is a lot of talk of being able to do that, but it's not really coming into service available yet. A lot of ideas. You have to remember, you're still on the first version of Mark 48. I think in let's see. Let me get my notes. Mark 48. Yeah. ADCAP doesn't come into service till 1988. So 1972, it's still Mod 1, the original one. And let's just remember that they supplied 18 torpedoes have been sold to the Republic of China Navy for 180 million. So they're not exactly cheap, like 48 torpedoes. Okay. I'm going to have to go get a drink in a second. Skill Torps any good? They're quite scary, but they're fairly decent. But again, there's not many of them around in 1986. AFAB, a number of passive towed arrays could be controlled to rise above a layer while the boat stay below. Yes, but again, the boat can only go at slow speed, and again, it has to be very close to the layer. So, because you're thinking of a layer as being something which is consistent. One of the first things when you talk about talk with a submariner, they'll tell you is the layer is A, higgledy-piggledy, and B, you have to be very careful manipulating it. You have to be very careful. It is not a panacea. It is not a magic cloak of invisibility. It is a thing you can use, but it's like... Let's see, what can I use? It's going to seem random, but it's sort of how I explain it to students. So, and because I have it, I'm going to use it. So it's this helmet. It's great. It gives me protection over this part of my head. That's brilliant. But I need to be able to see. I need to be able to breathe. I need to be able to hear. I need to be able to talk to give people orders. So this means I have to have this space uncovered. If the thermal layer is like this, it's sort of, yeah, there might be a bit of protection, but there's also going to be areas which are exposed because that's the nature of it. And the thermal layer is even more strange because it works like me trying to hide behind... yeah. So, now, you can't really see me. I am hidden from you. That's the great thing about a thermal layer, you know. But it might be, the gap might be bigger than this. It might be smaller than this. Isn't really changing the gap much because of the angle of it. But it won't be perfect. These won't be solid pieces of wood. It won't be a solid covering and make me disappear. It will reduce the likelihood of your detection of me. Not prevent it. Because again, if I'm a surface ship, I have a towed sonar array. I can dip that down low. So that might be below the thermal layer. I will have my own temperature gauges measuring the water, trying to work out where the thermal layer is. So just as much as something from a submarine's perspective can be used, a surface ship is doing the same to get it. It is... how do I put this? Anti-submarine warfare is chess, not checkers. It is about positioning. It is a bit about luck. And it is a lot about thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead and hoping things work out and your opponent doesn't see what you're going to do and doesn't figure it out or get lucky. Vision, could whales be used to tow submerged barges across the Atlantic, like a wagon train across the prairies? I doubt it. Come on, reskill. A non-nuke skill is a close last-ditch anti-submarine weapon. Not seeking, but but fast. If a 688 shoots a torpedo at your sub, you fire a skill and have a chance to kill it before its Mark 48 hits you, or force it to dodge. Both ways, the guidance wire is cut, whether it saves you from the capitalist torpedo or not. Okay, yeah. Oh, there's been so many random RAND studies. Basically, anytime someone has a random idea, they send it to RAND. But there again, there's also the possibility that the study RAND claimed it's building for is not the study it actually is doing the work for. But they are hiding the money below a cover study. Although I'm sure no one will ever think to do that. And Fab, given how much cash is chucked into modern submarine warfare frigates, whereas Silence, how good how Silent studies 80 ships? Type 22 or Oliver Hazard Perry? They're fairly decent for the 80s. Frank Spasata, how would convoys work in the Mediterranean? Well, that's the reason why I haven't been talking much about French escorts or Spanish escorts or Italian escorts, because if you've got anything going on in the Mediterranean, they are probably being used for doing that. Now, the thing is, again, difference you have to think about. Sledgehammer or the 4.5. It's lovely. The little hammer. We talked about precision weapon. But it can also be used as a screwdriver. Or another screwdriver. Or another screwdriver. Or another screwdriver. The point I'm making is that the Allies spend a lot of time with their ships and their weapon systems, making them as multi-tool as possible. In other words, yes, you have the hammer. Yes, it's not as big a hammer as the Soviet hammer. And so when you're doing a computer simulation, which is very much ones and zeros, you can get a certain result. However, this is a mighty, mighty tool. It is. The 4.5 is mighty. But in the end of the day, it's a one-shot weapon. It's very, very powerful, but I can only use it to hit at that power. The Soviets design their forces around mass strikes. In computer simulations, a mass strike always looks decidedly scary. But the thing about computer simulations, I have found in my experience, is they tend to not be as great when it comes to thinking about random ways of viewing things. Now, if I want to build a fence or knock a wall down, this is what I'm going to use. And it's great. Believe it or not, I wouldn't want to really use this to, well, it could build a part of a fence, i.e. knocking out the panels, if I really wanted to be using it for a long time. Or it could be used to pull down a wall. Again, it would take longer, but it would do it. But I could also use it for screwing up a wall, for dealing with light fitting. So, yeah. They cost about the same. On paper, this is all conquering. In reality, I probably am more able to use this, and this will provide me more utility. But 4.5 is cooler. Trent McCartney, so how do you see this scenario playing out? I see it developing as two distinct battles. I think the carrier battle groups go north. And I think they are in battles with backfires, badgers, bears, everything being aimed at them. But I think you also get a convoy battle, because I think it would be a very silly Soviet commander who, A, if they did get the chance early on to try and seize Iceland, didn't try and seize Iceland. But also, B, if they get the chance to knock out convoys, to not try and knock out the convoys. To knock out the convoys, I'm probably going to be using the Victors. And I'm probably going to be using them to take out the escorts so that the badgers and whatever ones I can get past after suitably suppressing Iceland in whatever way I have, possibly by doing a huge mass missile strike on Iceland. You know, we often think about them launching the first strike against the carrier battle group. Well, it would be far easier to launch a mass strike against Iceland. If you take out Iceland, you take out a huge amount of things which the Allies depend upon, and you don't need to take Iceland to take it out. And then it becomes a convoy battle. And that will not be nice. It'll be won, in some cases by the Soviets, and in some cases by the NATO. It's going to depend on the commanders. You know, as I said, if you turn this into a contest of hammers, this will win every time. It will whack everything down and is the super hammer. But if you turn it into a battle of leverage with a little Phillips screwdriver, well, this will win. So that's the thing. It's going to depend on the commanders of the forces and how they manage to set up the fight. If I have escort carriers, i.e. Atlantic conveyor types with lots of helicopters, then that's going to cause your submarines a lot of trouble because they're going to be dealing with helicopters a lot further out. If I've got the Sossus line and I've got the Certas trawlers doing their job, then your submarines are going to start being wheeled down a long way away. And the thing is, it works as a confidence game. We've been talking about all these things, but it becomes a confidence game. And this is something which, again, is hard to model. What happens to the Soviet commander who, even though they survive being hunted by a P3, are now looking at a convoy, are now hearing a convoy over the sonar and thinking, they have lots of helicopters, there's more P3s. There's escorts with towed array sonars. What is that commander going to be thinking? What's going to be going through their heads? Being a submarine commander is a lot about confidence. There is possibly no lonelier position as an officer. No lonelier role than being in command of a submarine. Because you think if you're a fighter pilot, yes, you're on your own, but you're on your own. There is no one depending on you for making the right decision. If you're a submarine commander, you're looking at those scopes. You're looking through your periscope. You're looking at you're assembling the data. It's all on you. And you can't call home, because if you call home, you'll reveal your position. You think about it. That's the equivalent of, they are the equivalent of battalion commanders. And yet there is no one for them to talk to. So it's gonna be a hard-fought battle. I honestly think that in a lot of exercises we overestimate the Soviet capability in 1986, but we also underestimate our own capability. I don't think the differences were quite as massive as we might expect, but I still think the Soviets have an advantage when it comes to numbers of submarines, certainly, they can actually put in. As Bill Trude has pointed out, Prairie Masker, systems on FF, FFG, and Spruance class were remarkably effective. They did make a ship passing through water sound like rainwater. So, it's half a dozen one and 6 the other over the result. But I think the battles turn into a lot of anti-submarine warfare operations and a lot of the heavy air attacks. So I think you basically turn the Atlantic into a version of the Mediterranean from World War II. And you've got to remember that actually a lot of the convoys made it through to Malta. Vast majority of the convoys made it through. They suffered losses, terrible freaking losses, but they made it through. That's the scenario you're looking at. And really, the Soviet Union needs to account for entire convoys. And U-boats had the highest losses, but they took them. They did. But again, the kill rate for some U-boats, there is a very big difference between the aces and the ones at the bottom of the pack. Then there are commissars. Well, that's the trouble again. If you think about the Soviet system, the commissar is not going to get involved in that sort of thing. They're going to merely try and jump on you if you do it wrong. But the problem is the commissar doesn't really know what's going on outside the ship. And the commissar is probably, and especially by 1986, I doubt there are many commissars around who are that suicidal. So, and to Merc Forest, Varus had the better troops, better gear, and equal number. They're totally taken off guard, and they were also strung out in a poorly arranged position. Varus really wasn't a good commander. Varus is not someone. Varus would be an interesting one for me and to put on the BT scale for me and Drac. AdFab, how much attrition could each side take is probably determined outside of it all going really nasty. I see the Iowas as a bit of both. I think they could well be used close to Norway as ground support against Soviet forces. I think that would cause a huge problem for the Soviets if they were trying to attack through Norway if the Iowas were within range. But I also think they possibly do get used as a missile soak for the carriers. I.e., that's a big hulking target. And look, by 1945, most of the U-boat phases have been sunk. Mm-hmm. Yes, the Beatty scale for how bad a commander is. This is the lack of drinking. I'm going to go grab a bottle of water. And while a glass of water. I'll be back shortly. But while I'm gone, I will leave you with the upcoming things. Yep, don't be this. I'll be back in a second. Literally just popping to the kitchen for water. Ooh, it's chilly out there. It really is. Whew. Sorry about that, but I'd run out of water. And I'm going to be rude because I'm going to go on my phone to turn on my radiator. Because it is really cold outside. I mean, it's okay in here, probably because of computers, but it's very cold outside. Then to a material screwdriver. It was actually a Marks and Spencer screwdriver hammer given to me as a joke by, I think, one of my family members. I think they thought it was a joke. I think they thought it was just a little hammer for me, for my tool shelf. And then I started taking it off and went, oh, it does that. And this, and they were going, oh, that's actually a, yeah. I think they thought it was a walnut hammer. Could the hours be CRWS trucks? I think they would be, partially, but, you know, they have Tomahawk missiles, and they are large targets that could soak up some of the missile hits. Oh, Imperium American. Starlight, what's the timeline? 2343, attacked by supposed ally, wasn't he? It's supposed to be ally. Yes, the gentleman who attacked him was actually the commander of his scout troops. But, you know, in the nicest way, if you are going to employ people who are your allies as your scouts, then you need to start being slightly more organized. The Atlantic is completely wrecked. If we go through this and think about this, you know, as I said, the rules engagement were no nuclear weapons, and the question Timothy Sims set was 1986. The GI-UK gap is not a nice place to fight a war, but it's going to be the division between what I would call an active carrier battle group combat area, i.e. I reckon the carriers will be in the Norwegian Sea and probably trying to head to the Barents Sea. As I've said, I think the subs will be trying to operate as far forward as the Barents Sea as they can for the Americans and the NATO forces. The convoy battle will be taking place down in the North Atlantic Ocean. The question is, of course, whether the Soviet Union starts this by invading Iceland, as in Red Storm Rising, or whether this is a slow increase in tensions which eventually leads to a war, which means that no, they haven't managed to seize Iceland. But in which case, and I say this with a lot of love and respect for the Icelandic people, who are beautiful and have some of the world's best natural hot tubs. I mean, hot springs. Very close to a hot tub. That's the dream, isn't it, of a hot tub? But leaving that to one side, Norwegian Sea, Barents Sea, I have a feeling Iceland, unfortunately, will probably find Keflavik and Reykjavik flattened by missiles very quickly. Definitely the fuel farms, probably the runways hit. Yes, you can rebuild. Yes, they will have a lot of stuff in hardened shelters to try and protect it and try and make sure it survives. But sufficient enough firepower, I'm probably talking fuel air explosive sort of warheads, would be used to significantly dent the Icelandic population and significantly wipe out the threat they could pose to any submarine forces. Because here is the dirty little secret, I think. I think if I'm the Soviet fleet and I'm trying to get my submarines out to attack convoys, then I'm going to go as north as I can in the Barents Sea, round Svalbard, down the coast of Greenland, and between the Greenland-Iceland part of the gap, rather than the Iceland-UK gap. Because despite the Iceland-UK gap being bigger, the nation on the other side of that is UK, and it also takes you closer to Norway, and there are all these extra allied bases which will survive and will have a lot of more people with anti-submarine warfare stuff in them. Whereas Greenland, Iceland, that area is particularly empty. And also, if you think about it, if you've got the carrier battle groups operating to go after the Murmansk and the Northern Seas fleet facilities in the Kola Peninsula and to try and support Norway, they are not going to be that side of the Norwegian Sea. So that's your safe passage. That also takes you out down straight into the mid-Atlantic, which becomes your target area. More interesting than not, if you look at the 1969 one, number 5 looks like it's heading for that route. That looks to be the route number 5 is heading for. Imperial American. Calling Marinus an ally is overstating. He was a Roman general and tested one of that. Let's put it this way. He was used as a Roman general. He was your reconnaissance. And yes, I can understand Varus in terms of his deciding to trust him. It's just, I'm not that trusting. Very useful to have. I would certainly have him providing my cavalry because he's a trusted general, but I would not trust my cavalry in anything other than a battle I controlled. And I certainly wouldn't trust my route of march security entirely to him. Actually, if NATO gets to access Swedish airfields, won't they just strike the backfires on their bases? If they get access to Swedish airfields, but why would Sweden give them access to the airfields? Remember, Sweden is technically neutral. Imperium American, hot springs really are just nature's hot tubs, aren't they? That's my view. That is my solid view. You're not going to say food. Honestly, the various forms of salted fish I have traditionally been given by Icelandic friends as being their national diet have made me be surprised that McDonald's and Pizza Hut have not completely taken over their natural food. They are lovely people, though. What if Iceland pulled out of NATO and the British win the Cod Wars? What do you think would have been the impact? If the British won the Cod Wars, then Iceland would have been far poorer, so I'm not sure why they would have pulled out of NATO. But if they then pulled out of NATO, the Americans would be worried about them falling into the Soviet Union alliance. So at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if you found a surprisingly well-armed, well-equipped, and well-trained uprising take place in Iceland, which replaced installed a leader who wasn't in the Soviets' pockets. Trent McCarthy, if some unfortunate Soviet ship was beset by a case of and then things got worse and found itself in gun range of an hour, is the resulting boom similar to one from Jutland? Yes. Tony343, but I can dig some meatballs. Meatballs are good. Imperium Arminius was raised in Rome. Arminius, yes, he's raised in Rome, but he's not Roman. This is the point. This is the thing the Romans themselves didn't really understand at that point. They'd raised him in Rome, they were treating him as an extension of Rome and all these things, but he's not Roman. He is the great warrior. Nicest way, if I had been employing Arminius, I would have had him recruit his troops and I would have sent him to the Far East. Then I'd have trusted him. Never ever. The thing is, I wouldn't have trusted him in Germany because in Germany, that's his home territory. Whether I consider him Roman or not, that's where he, was born. That's his family, his roots. That's where he has an independent support base, which is separate from what I provide. But, as I've said before, I'm mildly evil. Or paranoid. Adrian, what are the Finns doing during all this? Probably preparing to be invaded and arming everything. Kind of like the Swedes. Death Squad, a well-organised revolt, the members of which all seem to have oddly American accents. Yep. Darius Radsky, do not open the Swedish fermented herring in an enclosed area. It's worse than any tear gas grenade. I would add that, well, add fab, definitely not on a plane, but under no circumstances in a car. From personal experience, no circumstances do you allow anyone in the car to open it, because it wasn't me who opened it. It was my friend who is Swedish and went, "This is lovely!" And I went, "You are... Ah." Thanks for that sort of. In D&D, do you play Chaotic Good? Sometimes. This is France of all. How much threat do you think the socialist sentiments would be in World War III at the time? In France and UK in particular, let's face it, a significant number of Brits cared not for their PM. Yes, but you have to remember, and this is something which has disappointed so many agitators from the left in the UK. British politics tends to be socialist with a small s or conservative with a small c. And this tends to annoy quite a lot of people, or liberal with a small l. Mostly political parties it not tends to annoy. I have a feeling it could be more of an issue in France and possibly Italy, but there again, when you suddenly find yourself in a war with someone, it can make things very black and white. Eric Arkin usually opens so strongly with the box underwater. Gajan, did he walk home? Yeah, and I drove for the rest of the day with the car's windows open. No, he didn't walk home. I wasn't that cruel. But, yeah, he hasn't been given a left end again. Grace Darcy, are my comments coming through from all today? Some of them, I think. I think I've seen some. Dan Freeman, I'm a little behind. The BT scale, is it counted numbers of battle cruisers lost under your command? It's measured in flags you can get wrong. Anna must be a very good friend if he's not a former friend by now. He is now back in Sweden, so we are friends. We chat and email from a safe distance. So, this is one of those topics which are always fun to discuss and go through. And as I said, right back at the beginning, the point is about this sort of discussion is it's actually quite a good dinner chat. If you can keep it polite. If you can say, look, the rule is no one's wrong. You just have to be able to back up your point of view and your perspective. You can get through quite a lot. Agent, so why not Darwin scale? Because honestly, for all his faults, Beatty was at least in a battle when he managed to muck it up. Darlin was sitting in port. And was neither an officer who followed the rule, was depending on others to tell him what to do, or was actually following his own commands. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, so. Thanks for asking. Lion Skull, how many scandals and lost national secrets? Nah. The Darlan scale be how stupid can you be? In fact, when in Stockholm, Swedish mates had a summer tradition which involved Swedish items which purported to be consumable. If you want fun, be the only non-drinker in a party of people who all decided to drink absinthe, trying to get them home. I dislike a lot of hypotheticals and more, as they're often way too narrative and simplistic. Well, that's why I have to say I tried to make this as inclusive as possible. There is no simple answer to this scenario, and that is one of the reasons why I like this as a discussion, and why I've treated this evening as a discussion. If you noticed where I've been responding to chat and how I've been trying to get in it. I've not been treating it as a sort of question and answer session. I've been treating it as a very much discussion, having discussions with people. And there is a reason for this. The best way to learn to think strategically, the best way to learn to think long term, is to actually have open, proper discussions. If you consider, there is a there is a thing which goes around which says polite girls don't make history, or that goes around. Honestly, I agree. If your definition of polite is you do not discuss politics, money, or religion at the dinner table, or I don't know, difficult history at the dinner table, you need to be able to discuss these things. You need to be able to discuss them with your family, you need to be able to discuss them with people, and you need to be able to discuss them in a way which doesn't involve people flagging each other off. Now, sometimes that means someone might, as part of a thought discussion, say something completely absurd. And the thing is, if you're in a group of friends and you know each other well enough, you'll know when that person is saying something they actually believe, or if they're just making an argument for the sake of the discussion. As my students will tell you, I am very good at depending on reading on the room and taking the devil's advocate position of whichever way it is, because I can see which way the room is falling, and I don't want it to reach a consensus too quickly. I want them to actually have a discussion. Because you learn more by having the discussion. You learn to think strategically. You learn to think long-term by having the discussion. 1986 is a very good year to pick a discussion. Whether you pick Red Storm Rising style scenario, or you pick, I don't know, some of the various other scenarios which I discussed, the Hill scenario, which I brought up another time, there are options to discuss them. Discuss it. Think about it. Most importantly, be accurate with it. Dev Squad, once again I found myself in disagreement with your definition of fun. Grace Artsy, BT at least made decisions, even if they're bad ones. Darwin couldn't decide what to do. That's why it's the BT scale, not the other one. Frank Sparsato, if Carter is president in World 82, how does that affect the Falklands War? If anyone's... Carter is a lovely guy, but in the nicest way, he would probably have done whatever Thatcher told him to. Reagan and Carter both shared that same thing, slightly scared of Thatcher, which was good for them. It's good to have one allied leader who scares you slightly. It's something you need if you're president of the United States. Nora Wolf, gotta head out. Take care. Trent McCarthy, do you see any particular ship sub-aircraft type being surprisingly more effective than people think it would be in this scenario? Harrier. Let's get the exact details on Sea Harrier too. The FRS 51 came into service in 1983, and that's the post Falklands War version. The Sea Harrier 2 is 1993, and so 10 years later. And that really is an upgraded version. And it's quite capable. So basically the FRS 51 is the FRS 51 is technically the version produced for the Indian Navy, but at the same time as that comes into service, a whole load of systems are added into and used under that program to add systems onto the Sea Harrier, the FRS-1. Now, the FA2 specification conversions start in 1988. these sort of midway upgrades happen in about 1983 and are basically Falklands War experience. Also, the Oliver Hazard Perry class. I have a feeling they would have done really, really quite well in the anti-submarine warfare work because, again, I have a feeling quite a lot of sub-captains would have gone, but I want to kill a proper ship, not a tin can. Imperium, American, agreed. If you can't stay polite while discussing serious topics, you aren't mature. Not necessarily something wrong in that case, but it needs to be recognised, not normalised. I'm a natural devil's advocate. It's a hostile position, but as you said, it fosters developed thought. You don't want to sit in self-conceit. I don't know, it takes me back to my college dorm days of solving the world's problems from dusk to dawn. That's always good fun. Basically the motto of what me, Drac, and Jamie get up to in bilge pumps. Sandra, potentially underrated system Type 22. I think after the Falklands War, the Type 22 is never going to be underrated. That's good. Talking Regan, how much was he still in control at this point? Was he still healthy, or was Nancy running things from the residence? I think Regan was still quite powerful. I wouldn't be surprised. There is an overstatement of how much Nancy ran, but there's also sometimes an understatement. Regan is fairly effective at what he does, but Nancy is a very, very smooth operator. I have a feeling the Joint Chiefs would have been presenting plans to him. The other thing about the Harry you always have to remember is that, again, in escort carrier operations, what's it doing? Is it fighting other fighters, or is it engaging things like bears? And possibly backfires if it catches them. I doubt it would. Backfires? Yeah, backfires. Possibly. Possibly they managed to catch a backfire. Imperium American, you might not have the computational power, but I do. Should I boot up command mod operations? You're more than welcome to. I would, let's put it this way, until I have this computer back operating, then that's going to be the YouTube computer with a few simulations probably for a while, and then eventually my plan is to have a computer set aside for running simulations and games. Nancy was the guard dog / gatekeeper. Yes. I doubt she'd have kept the chiefs away. So, yeah, granted Type 22 had its reputation for Falklands, was thinking that would likely be overshadowed by anything else in 1986 World War III scenario. Oh, more than likely. Frank here. If Japan had ships in the Atlantic, what would it be best to send? It would probably send no ships to the Atlantic, and there's a reason for this. Let's say the Pacific stays fairly peaceful. Then probably the US Navy says to the Japanese, can you take over the major role of watching the Soviets in the Pacific so we can withdraw forces as much as we can to the Atlantic? Again, having a capable ally is useful. And maybe some of the Japanese escorts do get sent, especially some of their helicopter carriers and anti-submarine escorts might well get sent. But not merchant ships is a different matter. A lot of them could get sent. In fact, they might even provide the escort carriers. After all, them, South Korea, probably in the 1980s, have the capacity to turn merchant ships into escort carriers the quickest. Dischargeful. Big issue in the Falklands was the Argentine Air Force didn't have the ability to linger. They were at the edge of their range and could not effectively dogfight. Yes, but also think about this again if we go to this map, which is currently up. Again, the thinking is you would honestly be taking those convoys as far south as possible. To again restrict the Soviets' time on target. Yes, it will add days to your sailing time. But if you can get that start of those convoys safely to the coast of Portugal, with the Azores perhaps providing cover, and then sail them up the coast, so past Portugal, France, across the Bay of Biscay, and up to the Channel. You've got them under friendly air cover the whole way. You've got them protected the whole way. You've made the job of any submarine captain that much more difficult, because that is not exactly deep water for them to be in. In fact, what does the PLA learn from this? Island chains and all that. Well, what have they been forming? You know, we're talking about the South China Sea. We're talking about the GI-UK gap. Although, as Adfab also points out, replace Iceland with the word Taiwan, and you have the problem here. Website, do you think that a Cold War scenario would not have escalated to nukes? Well, here's the thing. With nuclear weapons, everyone talks a big game. Because you have to seem prepared to use them, otherwise they're not serious. If you have a Prime Minister, and this was part of the trouble with Jeremy Corbyn, which the Conservatives kept hammering on about in the last election, was that if you have a Prime Minister who says he's not prepared to use them under any circumstance, then they're no longer a credible deterrent. So, because that's the rule, everyone goes out of their way to make it look like they would use the nuclear weapons, to make it look credible. However, if you actually use nuclear weapons, then other people will use nuclear weapons, and very quickly you end up with a mass exchange which will destroy quite a large chunk of the world. There's also the other problem if you use nuclear weapons, especially if you use them later in a conflict, because when you use them in the first rank of conflict, you probably have, if you're Soviets, your Type A armies available, which are your best equipped formations, which are most likely to have nuclear biological warfare capability and to be able to survive operating in the kind of increased radiation environment you have after nuclear exposures have gone off. Because remember, the radiation doesn't disappear, it hangs around for a while. Same with biological weapons. It has a half-life, it has a ongoing presence. So, the thing is, as the war goes on, the likelihood of using tactical nuclear weapons actually goes down, because you're likely to damage your own forces, but also prevent your own forces being able to take advantage of any attack you make. This is why also the fact that they invest in things like Blue 66, and I think that was called Hades, but I'm not sure, and various other systems which are non-nuclear fuel air explosives, which cause humongous damage. You do that because you don't want to use nukes, because if you use nukes, it's complicated. Trouble is, nukes also escalate. So, whilst I will talk a big game, And it's sort of like this when you talk about the Aquilas and the Alphas. Yes, doctrine says, the doctrine that's published and I talk about is that I will use my latest and greatest submarines to come out and attack the imperial capitalist, Americans and all these things. That's brilliant doctrine. That's brilliant shouting a wow for your strategy. But actually doing that in reality, well, hang on. That's going to leave my Typhoons and all my lovely great big SSBNs, which are a critical part of my national security, unprotected. Now, if I have managed to cut off, let's say, the White Sea and huge areas behind multiple layers of sonar, of various minefields and defenses, which means that you can't get your submarines into them, but they are safe below water, so they aren't easy to take out either, and they've got enough space to hide. Okay, maybe I do it. But if I haven't got that scenario, if I haven't had weeks, months to prepare for a war that I thought was coming, so I'm using precious resources to actually do that, I've got to protect those subs. Those are vital national assets. That's the Aculas. That's the Alphas. That's going to be what they're going to be called for. So you see, there is always part of me which is slightly skeptical whenever I see a doctrine. In that, I always remember a doctrine has three audiences. It has the government, the rest of the world, and the service. Doctrines tend to be about making the service think and start thinking about how they're going to use these assets. It might not be exactly how they're going to use these assets. The rest of the world, it's how I want them to think I'm going to use these assets. Again, it might not be how I use it. And the government, well, it's how I want them to think I'm going to use these assets because it justifies them buying it for me. But it could be different. So that's a rather long answer for me saying I think there is a good chance it doesn't go nuclear. At least not quickly. Resasowski. Anuk, Portugal is NATO. Was Spain in 1986? I'm not sure. Possibly. Resasowski, one important thing we haven't discussed yet. What do Icelandic cod think of all this? Not very good. Scenario, radical scenario. You could have the Soviet Pacific Fleet versus an uncomfortable alliance of James DF and Plan. That would have been interesting. Spain was in NATO, I think, according to AbFab. Imperial American supplies that arrive a few days later are certainly preferable ones that never arrive at all, being stuck in the ocean floor. The France war. Again, if the USSR did salami tactics, then yes, they could, in theory, make significant gains. That's good. I think you can look at the many Bush wars where both sides supported a faction for Cold War scenarios didn't escalate to nukes. Imperial American, nukes are likely a desperate option. You're basically forcing an everybody loses scenario. So it's basically, I think if you have troops setting a foot on Soviet soil, possibly you would have nukes. And I think, again, if you had Soviet troops setting foot on French soil, I wouldn't bet about the French not being tempted to use nukes. Especially after the experiences of World War II. But I'm not sure, they're sweeping through Germany. We're going to use nukes. That's going to be a lot of umming and ahhing, because if you do them, that's going to be huge civilian casualties. This is the point, again, for NATO. If they use nukes in Germany, there are going to be huge civilian casualties. There are going to be. The radiation is going to get in the water. The radiation is going to... That's not good. Going out and read nuke escalation. Not to mention it means someone begins to whip out mustard and anthrax and all sorts of other more fun things. It's why I think France is the wild card. They don't want a second occupation. That's more likely to use nukes if invasion is threatened. Essentially. That's happened, Thompson. Dodgehanger, if you sink a ship with nukes, they'll nuke your ships in port, which means they'll nuke a city. So you'll nuke one of the cities. There is, the moment you let nukes out of the bag, it's just going nuclear. There's a Scottish island where anthrax was tested. It's still inadvisable to go without a hazmat suit. Yeah, they did think about this, removing and disposing of the topsail. They also thought about using fuel or explosives and all sorts of things. Decided not to. It's not a film. YouTube Russian Invasion Zombie. It's a comedy by fairly accurate concept. Cool. This Russell, you never want to force nuclear weapons. You want to show that if you use them, you're the bad guy, at least in your own conscience. There's like nukes in Germany. Look at Red Storm Rising. The scenario is terrifying. Yeah, and I think that was downplayed a bit. Pete Dawson. Spain was in NATO, hence the Persian of EV8As by Spain via the USA. Yeah. And Fab, biological weapons are pointless, are they? It's locked us all down. I have to admit, in a modern, as part of a war scenario, when you're total war mobilizing, if they hit at the right time in the right locations, they could cause a huge amount of damage. Pondering him, hi Doc, gotta say, today's build trunk was delectable. I really loved it. Thank you. Flip side, none of the Bush wars were USA against USSR. I'm fairly sure they found some Soviet pilots flying in Korea and some very interesting things in Vietnam, but none of them were officially versus each other. Descott, re-nukes. Truman sacked MacArthur and Lee May in part because both wanted nukes to be commonplace in modern warfare. MacArthur tried to get the Joint Chiefs to give him control. Yeah. That wasn't happening. Just judging from these comments, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or bad thing I missed today's live. Just already 4 hours if I were typing. I think we'd be 2 hours behind right now. Right. So. Many 1640. Wasn't Germany the location of the famous chicken heater devices? Don't go there. They're just disturbing. They are disturbing. There are so many disturbing ideas. Disney3434. I'm so behind a build trumps that with the next Mega Dry Dock coming soon, I decided to literally quit my job to catch up. Oh, it was it was a good episode. It was fun. Right, let's talk. What have we got coming this weekend? We have Brew Ships 46 Accounts of a Naval War. That's going to be fun. Gold Trunks is recording tomorrow, so we'll be having fun doing that. Speaking of build trumps, I used statements by Clap to win an argument, so that was nice. I'm glad. General May was head of the USA Air Force under Kennedy. Yeah, I had to say it's one of the names I know from the US Air Force. Um, hmm. He was the one after. He was 1957. So I think it was. I think actually Truman. Seems from the story actually was that's the reason why Truman put LeMay as confirmed commander rather than designated commander. And I think on Monday, I think it's Monday next week. I think it is the 26th. Yes. I'm not sure when we have World of Warships because I've seen things saying it's Monday and I've seen others saying it's Friday. So I'm a bit confused on that one. I will check in tomorrow with Bulge from the crew and find out. Hi, Dr. Clark. Sorry, but daddy time today. Well, that's always good. Take care of the daddy time. That always matters. That's good. It depends what you mean by USA versus USA. No open war for Germany, but troops from both countries fought each other regularly. Yeah. Right. Okay, speaking of episodes, you are now on 47, which you are recording 47 40. Just in case Drac is doing the intro. I think it's episode 47. Don't worry, we will be checking. We're slowly working out what we're going to do when we get to episode 52. Will we cry? And I'm going to say thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you've had a nice time. I hope you've enjoyed the video this evening. Thank you to everyone who's on Discord. Thank you to everyone for a super chat. Thank you to everyone who's last Friday of the month is Armchair Animals. In which case, that should be next Friday. Not this Friday, but next Friday. And I hope you've had a good evening. I hope you've had fun and take care. It might be the day to submit questions. Thank you, everyone. And thank you. Thank you, Pepminter. It's been fun. All right, so. Thank you, DGB40. Thank you, Grosarski. Thank you, Iceman. Just imagine density, my density in the Baltic if final started. Oh, that would have been really interesting. Hello, Pepminter. Thank you, Francis Fault. Thank you, Stafford Thompson. Thank you, Nook. Thank you, Darius Razowski. Thank you, DGB40. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Dope Squad. Thank you, Plebiscide. Thank you, Trent Lenko. Thank you, Albert Zaski. Thank you, Turning 3434. What question should I ask an armchair admirals? Oh, go for a fun one. Take care, this Francis Fault. Take care, Stafford Thompson. Thank you. Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, Frank Spasso. Thank you, Sabral. Thank you, Nook. Thank you, Imperium American. And thank you, Hedron. And thank you, Counterface. Thank you, everyone. Take care, everyone. Night-night, and see you Sunday, if not before. Take care. Take care, Hedron, Imperium American. And Jeff Beeler. Thank you. Take care. Bye. Cool. Come on. First, ask you, when is the cookbook brew ships? Maybe. Because I can't resist a good question. Sean Brennan, is there any scenario where air assets in Europe get low by attrition so that air carrier groups are depleted of fast jets to support land campaign? Lots of them. But if you start taking the aircraft of the carrier groups, then you're going to lose those carrier groups, and that's going to make it more difficult to support the convoys and provide that barrier between the convoys. Because remember, if we go back to this map, if you've got a carriers operating forward in the Norwegian Sea, then you have the North Atlantic Ocean as a safe buffer zone for your convoys. If you don't have the carriers in the Norwegian Sea, you're basically abandoning Norway, and you're in trouble. So, let's put it this way, it has to be really, really bad for you to make that decision. Thank you, everyone, and take care. Many 1640, but it'll freeze in the ground, and electric lines for heating will risk getting found. Just use corn to keep it warm. Corn, yes, corn. Sprinkle inside and add chickens. That's just disturbing. Take care, everyone. Thank you.